So thrilled today to be able to chat with Mariah Wright, who founded Circular Union in 2019. And Circular Union in itself is a cross industry, multidisciplinary collective focused on the future of sustainable materials and design. Its vision is to find solutions that shift our linear design model to one that finds infinite regenerative value. And to fulfill this reformation, Circular Union provides insights to trends and innovation opportunities in hopes to help more and more people and companies expand their sustainability reach, and also to adopt this future focused approach to sustainable processes. Brands they have collaborated with include but are not limited to Campari, PepsiCo, Moët Hennessy, General Mills, and VDF in collaboration with Ventura Projects, where they release these mushroom based wood and fabric dyes, which we will certainly talk about today. So, thanks so much, Mariah, for this opportunity.
Thank you for having me, Karina. This is really exciting, and of course, I'd love to talk all things design and kind of what we're up to at Circular Union as well.
That's awesome. So, maybe to start, Mariah, it would be great if you can tell us a little bit more about Circular Union.
Yeah, so Circular Union is, as you said, you gave a very good and thorough introduction. We are a little about a year old now. We're based in Maine and New York. And New York is where my kind of main work has come from. I work a lot with bigger brands focused on futures and foresight and really thinking about their innovation opportunities through research and kind of framing that for them. But Circular Union really grew out of this desire to focus more explicitly on sustainable design and thinking about that from both a kind of research perspective and really wanting to understand how we could open this up as not just, and I think Karina, we've talked about this a little bit before, like being a quite niche design field to something that feels like it has the potential to really be the kind of mainstream bar at which all designers design. And also thinking about new opportunities in space for creative innovation that doesn't necessarily take place under the traditional kind of constraints of developing a product in a very commercial sense.
What have your projects been revolving around lately?
So we have a pretty broad base. A lot of my background has been in food and drink, but in the last year, a lot of our focus has been around color. Color is a really interesting one. I think from a kind of design and aesthetics perspective, it touches so many points of our lives and our design process. But a lot of the kind of traditions and standards within color is really toxic and polluting. I think it's something around 20% of all global water pollution comes from textile dyes. So it's an
Right.
industry that needs a massive overhaul. And I think that there's also a lot of opportunity to reinvestigate where we're kind of sourcing our color pigments from. So in the last year, we've worked on these kind of two projects. Um, One, we've been looking a lot at wood ash, like industrial wood ash, and how that kind of pure carbon that might, normally be thrown away can actually be a great dye source for textiles and wood and furniture, and even some concrete. And then the other piece, as you mentioned, is all around mushrooms and looking at kind of new pigment sources from the woods and forage sources and working with mushroom farmers, which has been really fun. And that is a whole world. Like the mushroom community is wild and I love it.
That's great though. Always learning from people in different fields, right? So, yeah, do you mind walking us through the process of creating these natural dyes?
Yes. So the this big project that has been almost a year in research has really been looking at mushrooms as a dye source. So there is some knowledge around mushrooms as dyes. There was a lot of stuff that was done in the 1970s in like Southern California, but nothing that really applied to wood. And that was something that we're really interested in is in Maine, which is where half of our studio is based, there's a huge amount of pine trees, and it's a very sustainable material source. And so it was thinking about how can we really elevate and celebrate pine, which might be seen as a quite like cheap and undesirable material, as something that can be really beautiful and celebrated. And we wanted to source a color pigment that was local to where we were. It was something that was going to require a really minimal impact to actually celebrate these and create these colors. So we worked with mushroom farmers and mushroom foragers, and we create something kind of like a mushroom tea. It actually looks like you're making a giant bag of, like a giant pot of tea when you're creating it. So we take the mushrooms that we want to dye with, we put them in a huge bag, we boil them, or if it's warm, we can also just leave them out in the sun, which is a little bit more minimal to do, and we like to do. And it creates a kind of really rich tea-like dye bath, and then we soak the wood that we are going to dye in the bath with a mordant, and it normally takes about 24 hours, the whole process. But the kind of natural tannins in the mushrooms are what dyes the wood, and we've been able to get ranges from, depending on the mushroom and the way we've treated the wood, from like bright yellow to bright pink. The colors have been really amazing. So it's been a really fun and exciting process, and one that there's still like very little knowledge about. So it's actually been really cool to just continue to learn and work with foragers and kind of expand this field in a way.
And I would assume that these colors stay on the wood forever, right? As they really soak in the hues.
Yeah, so they're it's can be quite tricky developing colors, because you want to, or I should say natural colors, because you want to ensure that it's light stable and is going to be a color that's strong for many years. So we light test all of our colors, and we've had really good results with them not fading, but not. It really depends on like the tannins in the mushroom, which are kind of these chemical bonds that actually adhere the color of the mushroom to the wood. But they've been lasting really well, which has been exciting to see, because that's also a worry, is that you develop all these recipes and then you put them in the sun and you have no color. So that's also been nail biting, but we've been really reassured by just kind of waiting and seeing how things change over
Yeah.
time.
Oh, that's great, and that's all right though. I think I'm pretty sure that it is the case where natural mixed with natural, so even if they do fade, they will fade naturally as well.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully there's minimal fading, but I think that is something from and it's a good point. Like, it's also kind of reevaluating our expectations of color, and the mindset around kind of like perfect and imperfect, and really celebrating that. I know um, for me, one of the big things is not necessarily that every color piece that we create is going to be I believe will be strong over time, but it's nearly impossible to have a perfectly consistent like dye bath, right? There's always going to be like a spider or a bug or like something that lands on your creation, and you get
Yeah.
like a little watermark, and instead of really being frustrated by that, we've slowly had to learn, and I think it's an exciting time in design in that way, to really say, this is something that is kind of a captures a moment in time and a season, and there'll be nothing like it creatable again, and that really celebrates the rarity and the kind of specialness, um, and I think that hopefully makes us value the products and objects we have more, as well as that they're distinct.
No, I so personally love the wabi sabi style or wabi sabi approach to design, right? In the appreciating every bits of imperfection. I think it really adds value to any product. Anyways, to be involved in sustainable practices is a huge scope, right? You can be in the production of things, manufacturing, or even in the customer touch point. I'm just wondering, why do you choose to be involved in the process? Like in the example of mushroom hues, color is an element of any object, right? It's not the object or the end product itself. Yeah, so why did you choose this, and or what's the beauty of being involved in the process?
It's a really good question, and it's one that I kind of have gone back and forth a lot with as well because my background is more research. Kind of getting more into a making practice is something that's happened for me more lately. And a big part of it is I think there's a huge amount of knowledge that you gain through actually going through the process of creating something. And I feel like especially now it's really underplayed, like having the kind of knowledge of actually making something with your hands and going through the design process of iterating and iterating and iterating. It really gives you a confidence in what you're making, but it also kind of teaches you the relationship that you need to have with the materials and how far you can push them and what you can kind of give. And I think it deepens your making knowledge, it deepens your empathy to the materials that you're creating with. And for me, it's been a really invaluable way to think about research, not just from like a very high level academic perspective, but from a really kind of testing, trialing, knowing, failing perspective.
Yeah. Since you mentioned your background, why don't you tell us more about it? I mean, you did mention a little bit about it before, about your past and why did you decided to start Circular Union. But I was thinking more of your outlook on the future because it must take part on this too, right? Is there something that you foresee in the future that triggered you to doing this?
Oh, another good question. I think there's a lot of energy and interest and enthusiasm and desire to think about design in a different way, to think about design as having to be more accountable than just making a good product, but how is that product actually making people's lives better and richer and not creating such a negative impact on the environment. I think one of the struggles that like I personally had is that there was kind of this division, at least how I was seeing it, where a lot of the energy towards sustainable design was going more into a marketing perspective, and I was struggling to see like really meaningful innovation take root a lot of the time. There's definitely massive exceptions to that rule, but greenwashing is a real reality of a lot of sustainable design in my experience. So in starting Circular Union, I really wanted to have a space that freed designers up and freed our kind of business collaborators up to think really outside their traditional day-to-day, to be critical about the material choices they were making, to experiment, to kind of step outside the traditional pressures of industry and product creation. And I think as part of that, looking forward, especially now the world is in such a strange place, I think there's a massive opportunity to be thinking more long term about how we design, to be thinking more meaningfully about our kind of responsibility and if we actually want to create a better design legacy now that we have this massive turning point, where everything from supply chains to even like sort of consumer mindset is really up in the air at the moment. So I'm kind of hedging my bets on this being just a great turning point for designers.
Right, right. Because what you do is also sort of consulting brands, right, and helping them realize their potentials and also constantly challenging them on how to become more sustainable. And I think, yes, there are many, many innovations on new materials these days, but a lot of the times, I think they're still considered novelty, yeah? I mean, yes, they're cool, but I guess in order to make a large impact or a large scale impact, many businesses have to be using this, or many people have to adopt this new concept. Or another way of saying this would be it should be the new normal, right? So, how do you think we can make this something that's quote unquote cool to become the new normal? What ideas need to be challenged and what barriers need to be overcome?
Ooh, it's a tough question, but it's a good one. I think, one of the biggest challenges in my mind for sustainable design is to really be critical about consumption. I think overconsumption is one of the, kind of biggest hurdles of, actually creating products that are, are going to meaningfully impact the kind of environmental impact of what we make. We just make too many things too poorly, and there's too much of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that is one of the most critical things that we can begin to change. And I hope that there's some momentum, at the moment where we're seeing people buy so much less, both because they, are financially in a very different position as so many of us are, but also, just really interrogating their life and thinking, do I need all these things that I have around me? So I actually, instead of seeing that as a real detriment to design, I think it's actually a really liberating thing to happen to design. This idea that, we can make less, but we can make less better. I think it's a really um, meaningful shift to how we can, begin to reposition ourselves. And for instance, in the context of color, the mushroom processes that we've been working on, they're quite labor intensive. It takes a lot of time. It's something that is very seasonally driven. We can only get certain colors in the summer based on when certain mushrooms are coming into bloom. Like there's a lot of things that don't necessarily line up with having a huge scale production operation. Um, but I think as we really think about wanting more value in the objects that we have and wanting them to be more kind of connected and speak to more responsibility, then there's room for these kind of more kind of process driven approaches to take root. So that's what I'm hopeful for. I think that that's really the biggest thing is um, making room and finding value in things that aren't necessarily designed at the most mass scale.
Yeah, no, I so agree that changing consumption behavior will be the biggest game changer. But I guess these bigger companies can also help these consumers to make better changes, right? That will be a faster process rather than having to wait for these customers to change their mindset.
Yeah, that's a really important point too, is like where does change come from? And I think it's kind of both. I mean, just like anecdotally, I live in New York, and I think all of everyone I know at some point in the last few weeks in this lockdown has cleaned through their closet, has reorganized every cabinet in their house, and it's really made them take stock of like what they have and what they care about, and does it really serve them? And I think that like business and design opportunities to come forward and say, after this huge kind of moment, how do we actually speak to this desire of like, really going back to less and really delivering in a way that we've kind of become lazy about delivering. um, so I think it comes from a lot of different fronts, and I think you're really right too. You have to put forward, kind of alternative visions for people to get behind it and see the value in doing something different. But I also think people are really part of creating that future too.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So, back to this color exploration, Mush-Hues, right? Where do you plan to take this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always really tempting, maybe I'm sure a lot of designers can relate to this when you develop a technique or a process and it's working and you're getting good results. It's really hard to not just be like, I'm going to create a product or a company, I'm going to make chairs, I'm going to make, and I definitely, there's a piece of that that's really interesting to me. But I think coming from more of a research perspective, I'm really interested in how, um, this kind of work isn't necessarily about such a direct route to market, but it can really be about sharing knowledge, collaborating with people from different fields, having something that's like more open and evolving and working with other people that I can learn from as well. Um, One of the things that I've been really interested in, which is maybe like uh, a little bit, I think it's a little bit speaks to the changing nature of business too, is that if I were able to scale this process up massively, there's an opportunity to look at like mushroom farms, for instance. A lot of was all news to me, but like a lot of sales of mushrooms are really dictated by the aesthetics of them. So like people love like a perfectly plump, round mushroom. And so there's actually a lot of, in the bigger farms, there's a lot of waste because if the mushroom isn't perfect or an insect bites it, they're not able to sell it and they kind of just compost them. But actually saying, this could be a whole like reasonably cheap color source. You could work with someone on the scale of architecture or someone on the scale of like a larger fashion brand and actually have this kind of like symbiotic business relationship where you're not like mining for new pigment sources. You're not having to waste a material that might actually have a home. So I think it's just like those creative networks and relationships that are always evolving, is something I'm really, really excited about. And hopefully that's something that's so much more beyond like our own practice. And we just keep on sort of feeding off each other in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So, what's next in circular union? What other things or areas or scope you would like to explore more through this platform? Because I'm pretty sure the hues are just a start, right?
Ooh, I think it's Uh, there's a lot of different things. I mean, food and drink is kind of where I came from, so there's a lot of interest in that space. But I think for me, it's also these like kind of in my mind false boundaries that we've created between certain industries. Like having done the project like Mush-Hues, it was so nice. It was so like eye-opening and inspiring to see that there could be such a connection between the materials that we create for food and the materials that we need source for fashion or for product design. So actually like interrogating these like boundaries that we create and seeing how we can build these stronger, more dynamic relationships. So I think I'm really interested to do more in the color space. I'm really interested to do more in this kind of like um, waste and like alternative material sources space. But it's also kind of thinking about the bigger systems in which these like kind of creation of waste and um, sort of underutilized resources can actually be like really thoughtfully designed for. And I feel like that's a really exciting opportunity for so many designers. I mean, it's a difficult time to be in design, I think, because there's so many talented people and there's so much the level of work is so excellent and high. But on the other hand, I think that there's also this massive opportunity to really like rewrite our roles and what we see as kind of the traditional spaces that we belong in, and how we understand what informs and defines our disciplines. It's really so open, and I hope, like for me, it's been a really liberating experience, and I think it can be for so many more people too.
Maybe the last thing I was just wondering, the name Circular Union. What went into thoughts? I mean, the name really reminds me of circular design. Was it something that inspired you, this concept of circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really interested in this sort of circular economy, and it felt like something that so many people were talking about, and it's really gaining momentum. And from a kind of design perspective, it really does feel like the future of where we're headed, that we do have to think so much more rigorously about the life cycles of what we create. But I think it's also, we have to think very rigorously about the kind of communities and networks we create around design. So it was trying to kind of like smash those two ideas together, where circularity on kind of standing for a really new process and accountability within that, and then union as in, really breaking outside of this idea of like independent star designer does it all alone, to actually, someone that's whole job is about growing knowledge, growing community, building networks, and that feeling like a great energy for kind of the future of design. And I think where so many of us, need to be thinking, and hopefully are excited about kind of building towards that new vision.
Oh, that's so amazing and so, so inspiring. I think the world really needs a system thinker like you, someone who constantly challenge our views, not only in design, but also in real life, right? Makes us really think if we need a perfect paint or perfect dye or perfect anything. Maybe, like you said before, we're okay with slight imperfections because it reminds us of a certain time, a certain memories. So, yes, no, thank you so much, Mariah, for all this.
So nice to talk to you, and I'm so excited about what you guys are building as well. And I think to that point about community, it's really excellent just to have a home to share some of these ideas, and to see other people doing, other work across so many different industries. It's really needed, I think, for us all to feel like there's like a connective thread in the way we're thinking, and we're not necessarily all just kind of off on our own trying to push these agendas forward.
Yeah, let's work together on making this global change happen.